everyone. My name is Priska Neely, and I am the managing editor of the Gulf States Newsroom. If you live here in Birmingham, you may have heard me say that on the radio sometimes throughout this week in a promo. But I'm so happy to have everyone here tonight, and isn't it exciting to be at a thing? I have been working with the Gulf States Newsroom since the fall of 2020. And the Gulf States Newsroom is a regional newsroom. It's a collaboration among stations here in Alabama, in Mississippi, and Louisiana. And the idea is that there are so many rich stories, so important stories to be told in this region, and there just aren't all of the journalists to do it. And we can do more when we work together to share resources and tell stories. So WBHM here in Birmingham partners with Mississippi Public Broadcasting in Jackson, with WWNO and WRKF in Louisiana. And we work together as a regional newsroom to, jump in when they're breaking news events. But we've also added a lot of reporting power into the region. And so those are the storytellers that you're going to hear from tonight. So I am the editor. I work behind the scenes getting all those stories out so that they air locally, regionally across these 3 states. And then they also air nationally on NPR. You're hearing a lot more stories from this region on NPR because of the Gulf States Newsroom. So we're excited to kind of have you peek behind the scenes a little bit tonight. And we've partnered with Local Lives, which is an initiative that really aims to do exactly this, to kind of break down that divide between journalists and community members, and to do it with storytelling. So tonight we're going to tell you the stories behind some of the stories that you may have heard on the radio. And we want to really bring the community, the community, closer to local journalists. And this may be a surprise to some, but journalists are also dedicated members of the community. We're here, and that's something that's also really excited about the Gulf States Newsroom, is that we live here and we are able to go out and tell these stories. So I want to start off tonight by just a quick reminder, since we may not have been out of the house in a while. Make sure your phones are silenced. Just a little bit of housekeeping there. And we're going to have 4 of our reporters take the stage to tell you some of the stories and share some of their experiences covering the region. But first, I am so proud to welcome to the stage the Alabama Poet Laureate. If you are here in Birmingham, you certainly know the name Ashley M. Jones. I had the pleasure of hearing her speak and hearing her read poetry for the first time last month, and was so glad that we were able to have her with us. So if you don't know, Ashley M. Jones is the Poet Laureate of the state of Alabama. That's a term from 2022 to 2026. She's an Alabama native. She holds an MFA in poetry from Florida International University, and she's the author of Magic City Gospel, Dark Thing, and Reparations Now. She also teaches creative writing at the Alabama School of Fine Arts, and we are so glad that she was able to get us in during this very busy month of poetry month, and she is going to take the stage now to bless us with some poetry to start us off.
But y'all would totally catch me if I fell, I'm sure. All right, well, good evening. So good to see everybody here, see everyone's beautiful faces. I am going to read 2 poems, as Priska said, and these poems hopefully can tell a story about Alabama. The first is a poem that I wrote a long time ago in my first book. And this poem imagines God speaking to Alabama, which actually this poem's writing revealed to me that there is a quiet beauty to this state. Often our state is very loud for other less beautiful reasons, but there is so much beauty in the small miracles that are here. So this poem is called God Speaks to Alabama. I molded you from red clay, sweet cornbread, the slow drip of a lemon squeezed over sugar and ice. I kissed you to life on the lips. Mama bird I am. My tongue feeds you blood. I have waited in this heat for you to pucker and say my name. Hallelujah, Alabama. I give you fire and blackberries and white, thick cotton. I give you the honeybee and the yellowhammer. Find me, swallow me down, and whisper me to passers-by as you sit nightly on the creaky front porch. You're a snapping person, you can snap. People don't always know the etiquette, and I don't know what the storytellers are going to say, but I personally love a little interaction, so I don't feel alone up here. The next poem that I'm going to read is sort of a riddle. I wrote my first book as my graduate thesis when I was in graduate school for my master's, and one of the assignments was to write a riddle. And so I decided to write a riddle about being from the South. So with every line, hopefully the reader or the listener will discover something about the South. Riddled in the heart of Dixie. I am the tail of a kite in the Birmingham sky. I am the crumb of hair between the teeth of an afro pick, the slats of butter in biscuit dough. I am Sheriff Taylor's clear breaths in that backcountry whistle, the rocks beating beneath Opie's country toes. I am the smell of fatback in a cast iron skillet, the crust flaked off of cornbread in the oven. I am the sparkling bellies of trains as they pass by Railroad Park. I am the pothole cupping a tire, the red dirt on the hill near grandmother's house. I am the sour and the grain. I am the lemonade and pound cake, the gulp of air in y'all. I am the tick of stars becoming brilliant in the sky. Open your mouth and let me land on your tongue. Let me wash you in Alabama heat and tell you who you are. Thank you.
Snaps are wonderful, but let's give her a round of applause too for those beautiful poetry. And being here in Birmingham, it's so nice to hear all of those riddles that she laid out, and you could just imagine Railroad Park. Imagine so many of the other spots that she laid out. So thank you so much for opening our evening. So we are going to get into some storytelling now. As I mentioned, as the editor, I am the one who works with the reporters to go out as they plan to go out into the field, as they kind of pitch their story ideas, and we work together to talk about, who will you interview? How is the story going to start? And it's really exciting to be able to give you a little bit more context into some of the stories that they've done, because when they end up on the radio, they're like 4 minutes long, but there are hours and hours that go into getting it there. So up first, we are going to have Brittany Brown. She is our criminal justice reporter for the Gulf States Newsroom. Brittany is based in Jackson, and she's a Mississippi native. Her reporting focuses on the region's prisons and incarcerated populations and examines how crime and violence impact communities. And something that I really love about what we're really dedicated to doing is connecting a lot of the issues that we hear today, a lot of those darker sides of things in the South, as Ashley mentioned, to history. How did we get here? And so Brittany's gonna tell us a little bit about that.
How are y'all doing tonight? Good, good. Well, as Priska said, my name is Brittany Brown, criminal justice reporter with the Gulf States Newsroom. So I'm going to talk to you all tonight about just some of my work. So I'm originally from Jackson, grew up there for the first half of my childhood. And I remember being about 8, 9 years old, every year going to the Battle of the Bands. And if you aren't familiar with what the Battle of the Bands is, it's essentially a competition every year that we have in the city where historically Black colleges and university bands from all over the South would come and essentially perform their halftime shows. So that was always a highlight of the year for me. And the winner, in my eyes, was always Jackson State University, my hometown college, right? Well, if you've never seen JSU's band perform, it is really a sight to behold. They're known as the sonic boom of the South, and that's exactly what they are. They're a sonic boom. It's just really nothing like it to experience watching their band perform. There's horns everywhere, tubas is the first thing I see. The horns, just the sound just goes like right through your body. The dance line, the J-sets is what they're known as. They're beautiful doing their choreography and their sparkly, glittery suits and everything. It's just, I just love seeing it. And the drum majors, they're just a whole different cup of tea. But I love it all. And that's what I think about when I think about HBCUs and what they mean to, what JSU specifically means to Jackson and what JSU means to Mississippi. There's so much history and so much pride there when we talk about our HBCUs, right? So, you know, flash forward to Black History Month this year. How many of you all remember the bomb threats coming into HBCUs, right? So when those came through, it really threw me for a loop because when I think about HBCUs, the first thing I think about is my memories, you know, growing up of Jackson State. And so those bomb threats, it didn't really align with, you know, what I thought of when I thought about Jackson State and other HBCUs. So if you don't know, at the beginning of Black History Month, this past year in February, dozens of HBCUs across the country received bomb threats, including all of Mississippi's HBCUs, which of course included Jackson State. So, excuse me, let me catch my breath here. Didn't get nervous till just this moment. So, being in Jackson, I decided I wanted to do a deeper look back at the history of white supremacist violence against Black institutions like HBCUs. So that takes us back to 1970. Raise your hand if you ever heard of the Kent State Massacre at Kent State University in Ohio. See lots of people. So if you don't know what happened there, on May 4th, 1970, students were protesting the Vietnam War, peacefully demonstrating, you know, letting their voice be heard. And the Ohio National Guard marched onto campus and opened fire and killed 4 white students and injured dozens of others. And that was a shocking moment because it was violence, death, and you know, it made national news both then and continues to make national news now, and as it should, right? But if I were to ask you, raise your hand, how many of you are familiar with the Gibbs Green tragedy at Jackson State University? Anybody? Not nearly as many hands, right? So I'm gonna get into that, but on May 14th, 1970, police officers marched onto campus at Jackson State just 10 days after what happened at Kent State and fired into a crowd of students, killing 2 and injuring dozens of others. And so that sent me further into a rabbit hole of trying to figure out why do we remember certain things and why do we not remember other things, right? So we're gonna take it back a little bit more into the early 1960s. And Jackson State's campus is right near downtown. And in the 50s, 60s, there was a street that cut right through the heart of campus from the outskirts of the city, South and West Jackson. And white motorists would have to take that street in order to get to downtown, only they would have to drive right through an HBCU campus. And while white motorists were driving through campus, they would shout out racial slurs and throw things at the students. And actually in 1964, one young Black woman was walking on her campus and was run over by a white motorist. And so from that moment on, protesters, student protesters actually, began letting their voice be heard and asking administration to shut down that portion of the street that cut right through campus so they could feel safe on their campus. Well, they were protesting year after year after year. No movement was really made until 1970. May 14th, 1970, that day, someone stole a dump truck from the city of Jackson, set it on fire, and it was right in front of Alexander Hall, a dorm that was on Jackson State's campus right along that street that I just told you about. And that was essentially students making their last point of, you know, we've been protesting year after year after year. This is it. This is our pinnacle moment. So the fire was put out without any incident. The police, the fire department came onto campus, put it out, everything was fine, no problems at all. But it wasn't until later that night when officers with the Jackson Police Department and the Mississippi Highway Patrol at almost midnight decided to march onto campus. And they had gotten false reports of a sniper in Alexander Hall. Alexander Hall was a women's dorm. Um, and you can imagine what students are doing, you know, at almost midnight, a warm springtime evening in Mississippi. They're just hanging out, enjoying themselves. They weren't protesting, they weren't rioting, they were just hanging out like students would do. But officers with, like I said, the Jackson Police Department and Mississippi Highway Patrol marched onto campus, fully dressed, fully armed. And when they made it to the front of the dorm, a student threw a glass bottle at the officers and it landed right at their feet. And after that, all hell broke loose. For about 30 seconds, it was just a barrage of police gunfire right into the dorm. And just to give you an idea of how strong and how forceful this wall of gunfire was coming at the students, one student who was taking a shower inside of Alexander Hall was actually shot. But in the aftermath of that, there was much, much worse damage and carnage to be seen. 2 students were killed, 2 young black men. The first that was killed was Philip Gibbs. And he was a 21-year-old political science major from Mississippi. He was a husband, had a toddler, and had one on the way, unbeknownst to him, at the time of his death. And the other student that was killed was actually a high school student, James Green, 17 years old, walking home from work that night and taking a shortcut through campus. And he was shot and killed by the police. But here's a caveat to that. He was not at the dorm. He was not walking in front of the line of officers. He was actually walking behind the line of officers. Again, just to give you an idea of the fact that they were just shooting in every direction. So those 2 young black men were killed. Dozens others were shot and injured, and others were just injured in the stampede of people just sent running in panic. And campus was changed. Alexander Hall, one half of Alexander Hall was completely destroyed, littered with bullets. Students were sent home for the rest of the semester. They didn't have a graduation ceremony for the class of 1970, and it left the city of Jackson, the black community in Jackson, unnerved, wondering, you know, where do we go from here in terms of trust between the community and the police? And so when I was talking to survivors of the bombing, because they're, I mean, I'm sorry, not of the bombing, but of the shooting, because they're still living, alive and well, I could see a lot of the parallel traumas between the survivors of that shooting, of that moment in May 14th, 1970, and the parallel traumas between HBCU students today living through these continuous threats, continuous onslaughts of bomb threats and other acts of violence, and specifically focused in on Jackson State, right? So at the end of that, it just left me with some lingering questions, some lingering thoughts, and some lessons learned. I think one of the biggest lessons for me was thinking about how as journalists we can be proactive, not just reactive, in the way we tell news and the way we talk about stories. Because I knew, you know, I didn't just have to wait for a bomb to detonate at one of these HBCU campuses, hopefully, and we never see that, but I didn't just have to wait for that moment to dig back into history and to evoke some of that history. But also, it made me think about how powerful it can be when we tell the news from a community-centered and a historical perspective. But I think the most kind of lasting point from all of this for me was thinking about what stories we remember and what stories we don't remember and we don't talk about and why. And I think as journalists, it's important to talk about these things. As a community, it's important to talk about these things because if we don't talk about them, if we don't remember them, they can happen again. Thank you.
Great job, Brittany. Thanks so much for sharing that story. As I mentioned, we are a regional newsroom and we're spread across 3 states. So this week is actually the first time our whole team has actually been together in the same space. I've gone to Jackson and I've gone to New Orleans and I've like met them individually and separately, but we've never all been together in the same room. And so we got the opportunity to do that this week, and we spent part of the day yesterday doing some whiteboarding and design thinking with post-it work. And we talked about the stories that we want to do and who we are. And one of the things that we really centered in that was that importance of connecting history to the present day and drawing those lines. Another thing we talked about is finding the light in stories, and that's something that our next storyteller, Stephen Basaha, brought up. We have a lot of heavy topics in this region that we need to shed light on, but something that Stephen and I do when the story allows for it is we do a pun sweep. We go back over at the end of the script and we say, is there any pun to get into this? We did a story about trains and we had all sorts of pun material in there. I was really proud. One time we got an email that said, good pun, like who was responsible for that? And I was like, wow, that's why I do what I do. So up next, Stephen Bisaha is the Wealth and Poverty Reporter. He's based here in Birmingham, so he and I actually are the ones who are together all the time. Everyone else is very jealous. He's a native of New Jersey. His reporting focuses on how people get by in a region with high poverty rates and how the programs designed to help play out in people's lives. Stephen.
So what really stood out about Dora Whitfield was her smile, which was actually a problem. This was July 2021, and I had driven from Birmingham to Dora's 3-bedroom house in New Orleans to talk with her about her extra unemployment benefits that were ending. This was extra money given to people out of work during the pandemic to help them get by, but Republicans were concerned that it was causing people not to return to work, so that was ending, at least in Louisiana. And for Dora, this extra money, it was essential. Before the pandemic, she worked at Harrah's Casino as a buffet waitress. And despite her bad knees, her regulars loved her probably because she was really good at keeping the bottomless mimosas coming. And those tips that they had given her really helped her pay for her house in 2014, this house that she just loved. And the problem was, though, with the pandemic, that meant no more casino and certainly no more buffet. And Dora was temporarily out of a job, and more than a year into the pandemic, that job still hadn't returned while these benefits were about to end. So Dora had this really tough choice. Either continue to wait for this job that she loved to come back, which she didn't know if it would, or take those bad knees over to a place like Walmart where she get paid a lot less. All the while she has to figure out how is she going to cover the mortgage for her house. And while we're talking about all this, she still got this big smile on her face. And I'm there with this freelance photographer, and we do the photos, we do the recording, and we wrap up and we go over to the rental car. Me and the photographer were talking, and I ask, hey, did you get any photos of Dora not smiling? Because it might be a little weird to have this story with Dora's smiling face under a headline that says, woman fears losing her house. So the photographer thinks for a moment and goes, I'll go back and get some more photos. And this is one we end up using at the top of the story. And I feel like if you look closely, you can actually see Dora's pain from trying not to smile. This is not the problem I expected to have when I took this job a little over a year ago. As Priska said, the job title is Wealth and Poverty Reporter, not the kind of job we expect a lot of smiles or joy. And honestly, I was afraid to take this job because I know how difficult it is to listen to these stories. I mean, think about how often you decide not to turn on the news because you don't want to be depressed by what's going on in the world. I was afraid I was going to be the person telling the stories that people didn't want to listen to. Yet a lot of people I spoke with, they were like Dora. She smiled the widest when talking about this 3-bedroom home, and particularly that her grandkids got to have their own bedroom complete with like these car-shaped bed frames. And maybe it's just having someone to genuinely listen, just getting the chance to talk. But I found a lot of interviews went like this, where it was not hard to find lighter moments, which I always try my best to include in these stories because I like to think it's less likely someone's going to tune out of them. So while Dora's smile, it might have been a problem for the photographer, it was a gift for me. But like everything, there's an exception, and some stories are harder to tell than others. That was the case with Kristen Murphy. Kristen's like me, we're both transplants from the Northeast. For Kristen, it was from, well, for me, it's from Jersey to Birmingham to here. For her, it's from Massachusetts to the Mississippi Delta. And I drove from here to Rosedale, Mississippi, in the Delta, to talk with her at her apartment. Could not have been, from what I could see, like no more than 200 square feet that she was sharing with her teenage son. And we sit at this small table, stovetop burners not far from my back. I pull out my microphone, I start recording, and I start listening. So here's a quick summary of Kristen's situation and why I was there to talk with her. So we all know about this social safety net. It's this phrase for all these different programs we have that are meant to catch us when we fall. And on paper, at least, in 2021, that safety net got a big boost. Yes, those extra unemployment benefits I'd mentioned, they had ended, but a lot of other programs got big permanent upgrades. Yet this safety net, it still has a lot of holes in it. And Kristen had fallen through. You got all these different programs, and often they clash. The benefits of one might mean you don't qualify for another. Then there's small mistakes, benefits cards that never made it through the mail, bureaucracy, too few people working in a government office and too many people that need help. That's what leads to a backlog and people not getting the help they need. And so while Kristen's telling me the details of her story and why she's not able to get the help that she needs, I'm working. I'm checking my equipment, making sure everything's recording properly. I'm thinking of the next question I should be asking. I'm thinking, how can I use part of this 2-minute answer in a 5-minute radio story? And at the same time, I'm starting to get worried. One, because Kristen's story is a complicated one. It's hard to do on the radio where people can't reread something to make sure they get it. Two, I'm getting worried because that fear I had is starting to come true. Kristen's story, it's an important one, but I'm having trouble finding lighter moments like with Dora to let people in. There is some laughter, there's some smiles, but none of it feels particularly joyous to me, and to my eyes and ears, some of it seems rather pained. And it didn't feel appropriate to try and push her toward finding a lighter moment or a silver lining in her own story. And I totally get hearing this and thinking it is inappropriate to find a light moment in any story about poverty. But I'm not doing this just to make someone on the other side of the radio chuckle or to make them think things aren't as bad as they actually are. I'm doing it to hopefully build a connection. Because what I love about radio is the intimacy of it. It's just you and someone else's voice. I think that's a great way to build empathy, but you can't empathize with someone if you're tuning out because you're too uncomfortable to listen to their story. So maybe Kristen felt the need for it in her own story or felt my need for it. But she did offer some moments of optimism, particularly around this one benefits program, this food benefits she was supposed to get months ago that was now supposedly a couple weeks away. And here's her talking about that.
I'm just excited I'm going to get my PBT card in the next 2 weeks. If they say 4 to 6 weeks, I've been waiting.
I'm sorry, that sounds like it's a lot of.
It's a struggle. It is. It really is. But I'm managing. Got God guiding me. My mama always told me good things come to those that wait. So she's always been right.
And that idea that good things come to those that wait, Kristen kept coming on back to it.
Eventually it'll come. Eventually what I'm supposed to get for my son, he'll have. It's just waiting. That's the struggling part.
And in the moment talking with her, I hear that. I think that's a powerful moment. And it's not a light moment like we had with Dora talking about getting to have these big family gatherings at her house and how joyous that was. But it is a moment I think people can empathize with, struggling while you are waiting for someone to help. So I put it in the story. And I think it still ends up being a pretty good story. But I don't feel great about the interview. And to be clear, this is nothing that Kristen had done. This is me feeling like I had missed something. And it wasn't until I was listening back to this interview in preparation for this event, I realized I had missed something. You heard a little bit of in that clip, this idea of Kristen saying, wanting to give her son what he deserves. And I hadn't really given her much space to talk about that. Because the thing about Dora's lighter moments, they weren't random. They were about her dreams. It was about her dreams being a homeowner. She had gone from living in public housing to being a homeowner. That's just amazing. And it was so easy to talk about that because it was apparent we were in the house. Kristen's dreams, they were harder to recognize because they hadn't been achieved yet, but that doesn't mean they were any less important to talk about. So that's something I'm trying to be better at. Continue to tell stories about people and their struggles and their problems, talk about these problems, but not just define them by these problems, but by their aspirations as well. Thank you.
Every time coming up that step is a victory. Um, Thank you, Stephen, for sharing that story. When we were having our kind of little retreat, we were also talking about some of the lessons. I had people go around and talk about why they became journalists, and also some of the lessons that they'd learned in their path as journalists. And we had things like, everyone's story matters and the importance of connecting with community. One of mine is that, stories matter just as much as the data and investigations. And Stephen's, the one that he offered was, if you're nervous about in an interview, just lead with a smile. I don't know if I said that right, but that was the lesson. And I just loved that because he goes out in the field and just gets great tape. And I'm like, is that what you're doing? Just smiling. Before I bring up our next storyteller, I wanted to just take a moment to tell you a little bit more about me and the Gulf States Newsroom. As I mentioned, we got started in 2020, and nothing else much going on at that time. Pretty normal time in the world. I at that time moved cross country from Oakland, California to Birmingham. And I'd been living in California for 7 years. I'm from Maryland, but I'd always felt a call to work in the South. I'd lived and worked in New York, DC, LA, and both of my parents are from the South. And I really wanted the challenge of doing exactly what we're doing, of working and telling these stories that really might not otherwise be told. Because in LA, you've got competing stations. In New York, you've got, all these different, breaking story, trying to get there first. And here, it's really just like, we need people to tell the stories. And I am so glad that this opportunity came together. But one of the things that I like to tell people is a little story about my blood. And sorry that everyone at WBHM has already heard this story. I have a rare blood type, and I like to give blood a lot. I'm a universal donor, but my blood is also negative for certain properties, and it's usually reserved for premature babies or immunocompromised people. So I give blood as often as I can, and they call it like golden blood or baby blood. It's very cool. And I give regularly. I remember like wanting to turn 17 so that I could give blood. I don't know, strange child. That was the age that you could do that in Maryland. And I've tried to do it as often as I can. And the end of 2019, I donated in Oakland, California. I gave my blood, as I do. Next month, I actually met someone from WBHM, and she says, there's going to be this thing called the Gulf States Newsroom coming together. I kind of had my eyes on Birmingham for a while, and I was like, yeah, I know. I'm really excited. I'm definitely going to apply for this job. And so Birmingham was just kind of in my mind. And the next week, I got an email from the Red Cross, and I'd never received an email like this before, but I got an email that said, after making sure that the local need was fulfilled, we sent your blood to a patient at the University of Alabama at Birmingham from Oakland. So, pin the memoir now, Blood Beat Me to Birmingham, you know, soon to be, I don't know, 20, when am I going to write it? 2025, 6? I don't know. Stay tuned. So that's something that, like, I knew this was an alignment on so many levels in terms of my passion for journalism and the region, but also, wow, talk about a sign. So that's one reason that I am so glad to be here. And I've just really fallen in love with Alabama over the past year and a half. I've made a lot of new friends who are in the audience tonight. And some of them are from Alabama, and I've told them about all my travels. I've been to the Northeast and explored 3 different waterfalls. I've been to Lake Martin. I love water, so I'm always just driving around trying to find water. Lake Martin, I've been to Gulf Shores, and I just really enjoy learning and learning more and more about this place because it really is special. This whole region is so special. And we think about the story that Brittany told about this rich history. We think about the story that Stephen told about so many people here who have their personal stories to tell. I'm really glad that we're able to elevate that work. So I know that the public radio landscape is kind of confusing, and you're hearing so many things when you listen to the radio. Where does it come from? I don't know. Well, it's too complicated. I'm not going to draw a diagram right now, but now you'll know that when you hear Gulf States Newsroom, that there are these people who are in the room now helping to bring those stories to you on your local station, but also on NPR, and making sure that we get those stories on nationally and elevate issues from this region as well. So enough about me. Back to back to the storytelling. Next up, we have Shalina Chetlani. Shalina was actually the first reporter to join the Gulf States Newsroom. In hiring a lot of people over the past year and a half, I've told everyone that I need people who can go with the flow. We're building something new from scratch. We started, it was just me. I was the managing editor. I had no one to manage. I had nothing to edit. Okay. I had to hire all these people. And Shalina was the first person that I hired. And we didn't meet for 6 months before we were working together. And we didn't meet for the first time for 6 months. And even still, I feel like we have been in the same, this is like our 3rd time in the same room together, but I feel like we have been in the room a lot together. Shalina is based in New Orleans, and she's a Mississippi native. Her reporting centers issues of access and equity in healthcare. She's covered every aspect of COVID-19 pandemic, from the access issues during the vaccine rollout to hospital staffing shortages. And she's someone who started January 2021 and seriously just hit the ground, got out there, and was ready to tell so many stories about healthcare, and also about some of the unexpected things that happen in this region. And that's what she's going to talk about.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. As Priska said, my name is Shalina, and I'm the healthcare reporter for the Gulf States Newsroom. So on Friday, August 27th, I was stuck in line at my local grocery store in New Orleans. And the scene was pretty chaotic. There were a lot of people. It seemed like there were hundreds of people in the grocery store grabbing different things off the shelves. And I don't know if any of you have been to New Orleans, but people in that city will literally find any excuse to throw a party. So it seemed like any other ordinary day in the city. But there wasn't a Saints game on, which honestly causes a lot of chaos. And there wasn't a holiday. What had actually happened was that overnight, the government of Louisiana had declared that what was first seen as a tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico was now a Category 3 hurricane, Hurricane Ida. And so it was me in the grocery store with a lot of other people making decisions. Do I stay or do I go? Do I put this ramen noodle in my cart and hunker down? Do I get these flashlights, candles, batteries? And I was texting my friends, some of which were journalists, right? I was a first time person living in New Orleans, first time journalist in New Orleans, debating these questions. Some of them kind of laughed at me, like, oh, category 3, no big deal. Just stay in your apartment, just, figure it out. But I thought about it more and debating these questions about in my situation, like, I have, a car. I have the money to leave. I have connections next door in Mississippi. I have all these things at my disposal, but hundreds of thousands of people in New Orleans do not have that at all. We've seen that in the past. We saw that with Hurricane Katrina. And so I started to ask myself, as I was debating this choice of staying or leaving, is this really a matter of whether I am exerting my privilege or recognizing that I have it? But it didn't really take much time for me to debate those questions because within 24 hours, that category 3 hurricane suddenly swelled into a category 4 hurricane and would soon be just shy of a category 5, the second most destructive hurricane to hit the state of Louisiana and some parts of Mississippi since Katrina. So I wasn't going to risk it. There was a lot that could have happened, and I live in a 100-year-old house. And so I packed up my dog and all of my things, and I drove 2 hours north to my hometown of Jackson, Mississippi, with the intention of returning back to Louisiana a couple days later and reporting on the hurricane, which is exactly what I did. And as I drove back into New Orleans, on the way to New Orleans, it felt like I had just seen a time lapse, essentially, of the hurricane. Mind you, I had experienced the hurricane too in Jackson, but this was so different. Driving on the road to the highway to Louisiana, you could see that the waters in the Gulf of Mexico were still swollen. You could see it off the edge of the highway. You could see the debris and the kelp. I guess there's kelp in this region, I'm not sure. That was on the highway. You could smell in the air what had just happened. It was the rotting flesh of dead animals that were on the roadways. It was the trash that was strewn about the city. It was the down power lines, the trees, the branches that were, that had broken off. But I was on my way to Laplace, a city just 30 minutes outside of New Orleans, and outside of the city's levee system. And so everything was way worse. I'll let your imagination take you there. It was way worse than what had happened in New Orleans. So as a reporter, and as not just a reporter, but someone living in Louisiana, this was my first time in the city of Laplace. And so after I'd actually gotten there, I looked up the statistics, the demographics. So the city of Laplace, the population is 17% in poverty, which is nearly double the national average. It's a predominantly Black and Latino area, predominantly immigrant population. These were things that as I was driving through and as I was seeing what had happened, I could guess that that was the case. But what I knew for certain as I was driving through Laplace, again, outside of the city's levee system, was that there were communities that had been completely left behind. And that was the case when I drove down a road and I saw an 82-year-old man named Melvin Caesar. So Melvin Caesar was quite a character. I first saw him sitting exactly like this in this rickety red walker, just sitting outside of his home, basically just waiting for someone to do something. He was sitting in the heat, the humid air, post-hurricane, the sun beating down on him. You could see the distress in his face. But Melvin is a G. This is his girlfriend. So Melvin is, like I said, quite a character. Quite a fiery young spirit about him. And Linka also had a fiery spirit. She decided to put on her makeup right after the hurricane had hit, because what else was she going to do in that time? But even though Melvin had this spirit about him, he was still really hurt by everything that had happened. So 3 days after the storm had hit and when I had come down this road, Melvin told me that not one single person, not a first responder, not a police officer, had driven down that road to offer him a helping hand or even a glass of water. So he was really hurt about it all. And this is what he had to say.
People don't want to do nothing down here. And I've been up in here for the longest. Dan brought water, Dan brought ice, Dan brought nothing.
Melvin was quite distressed about the situation. And you can see from the house, this greenhouse that looks pretty much, a shell of itself on the outside. As I walked in, I could see that the roof had been blown off, that there was leftover food on the stove that was still kind of rotting there, stinking up the place. There was broken glass, there was concrete strewn about everywhere, there was black mold that was already growing in the cracks and crevices of this home. The walls had come apart, there was asbestos everywhere. And he was just here, dealing with it, breathing it all in. As an old man, no one had come to help him. And it was shocking to me because as I began unfolding the story a little bit more, I realized this wasn't just a disaster story. This was a story about Melvin and his life. He told me that this home had been in his family for generations. His father had moved here over 100 years ago, and he had built that home, and it had survived so many storms, so many tragedies, and now it was in shambles. And in that picture we saw, there was a tree behind him, one that was very important that his father had planted, that many generations ago. This is what he said.
My dad, when he died, my dad was about 107 years old when he died. And this house been there ever since,
Melvin was sad about so many things that day, about the situation he was in, about the fact that this was his family land and he had put so much work into it. His dad, his grandmother, everyone that had been here for so long, and that no one really came to help him despite all of that. He had contributed to the community for so long, and he was completely forgotten. Unfortunately, I couldn't stay that long that day because there was no power in Louisiana, and I myself needed to find a place to go. But I decided to come back a month later for some more reporting to see what had happened. You would think after a month, the situation would be a little bit different. But I met Melvin's nephew, Donald, and he told me that actually nothing had changed. This is a picture a month later. All of the family's belongings, heirlooms, personal items, things that are very private to a family, were out in public, just strewn about, and wet and damp and moldy, and no one had come to help them clean it up or pick it up. And it was very interesting for me as a reporter talking to this family, because you would think for some people, they might ask, why don't you just leave? You're dealing with so many situations. Why don't you just pack up your things and go? And I realized that the answer to that question of why don't you just leave isn't so simple. There are a lot of journalists that come to the South and come with these preconceived notions about what it's like to live here. And they think about poverty, they think about tragedy, and they wonder why people just don't exit those situations. But it's a lot more nuanced than that. There are elements of race, class, socioeconomics, pride, and heritage that come into play with why people decide to do the things they do in this region. And Donald said that to me about his grandmother and how he felt like he had to live in his truck and watch over the land because it was theirs. It was the Caesars' land. They had been there. And this is what he said.
My great grandmother, she wanted to see all her family on one street. She accomplished that because most of this land was hers.
His great grandmother accomplished that. She saw all of her children living on the same street. And Donald told me that the family had weathered so many storms before, they were going to continue to weather them. And I thought about that, in the context of my own story. I experienced the hurricane myself, right? And so many other people experienced it. And while I was debating the choices I had of whether I stay or leave in the comfort of a grocery store and my ability to go and buy the supplies I might need, or even decide, I can just go to Jackson, Mississippi if I need to, for that was a wildly different situation for the Caesars, right? Because for them, it wasn't a choice about whether they needed to leave, because their priority is and will always be to stay.
Shalina actually called Melvin back the other day, and that house, that house that you'd seen that had been in the family so long, still kind of waiting to hear what's going to happen. They may have to demolish that house, and he's living there. He's living in a trailer next to it, kind of waiting to see what assistance, what aid he can get. And that's another thing that I'm really proud of that we're able to do is to circle back, to check in with people to see how they're going. Like Shalina mentioned, we went during the disaster when it was all eyes on it, but she went back a month later. We're continuing to go back and check in with people and make sure that we don't forget, whether it's short term or long term. Anyway, great. I just want to give it up for Shalina again. So, we have been, as I mentioned, convened here together, and I wanted to, I feel like I put my camp counselor hat on, and I wanted to take everyone around. It was a lot of people's first time, really coming to Birmingham, and I wanted them to get a taste of some of the things that I love so much that, meant literally going to some of my favorite restaurants. But also this morning, we went to the 16th Street Baptist Church, and we got a tour. And it was such a powerful experience. I'd been to Kelly Ingram, I'd been to the Civil Rights Institute, but this was my first time being in the church and, seeing and hearing where this, tragic event happened, but also what has happened since. And just recognizing all of the events that happened in that park, in that church, in that square. And there's so much amazing history, so much civil rights history in this region. And there are people who are continuing to fight for change today. And Bobby, our next storyteller, is going to talk a little bit about that. Bobby Jean Missick is the Justice, Race, and Equity reporter for the Gulf States Newsroom. She's based in New Orleans as well, and she's a native of Turks and Caicos Islands. Her reporting explores issues like immigration, environmental justice, and education through the lens of racial equity. And another thing to know about Bobby is that she is also a stand-up comedian. And so when we talked about that light and opportunities to bring that into our stories, I'm excited to bring some of that to the stage right now. So Bobby Jean Missick, everyone.
Hi, guys. I kind of wish you didn't know I was a stand-up comedian now. That's okay. How's it going? I worked on a story in January 2021 about race-based hair discrimination. And if you're thinking that people will hate on anything, they will, even hair. It's crazy. But I really connected to this story because as a Black woman who was once a Black little girl, I have had a complicated relationship with my hair. I remember being really young and loving my hair. I loved my fro. Grew up in the Turks and Caicos Islands, like she said, and see, that's me loving on it. We would go to the beach every Sunday. I was allowed to take my pigtails out, and I could feel the ocean like in my hair, and I loved getting out and flashing my afro and feeling the droplets of salt water on my sun-drenched dark skin. I loved it. Then we moved to the States, we moved to Florida, and all the Black women around me had straight hair. And so I felt like it was like the grown-up thing to do. When I was 11, I begged my mom for a perm, otherwise known as a relaxer, to straighten my hair. And some people who've had perms will understand this experience, right? You go to the salon, there's a bunch of women sitting around with black hair, hype hair, and Jet magazines, right? It smells like Lester's pink oil and rotten eggs. And there's a televangelist on the TV in the corner. I don't know, my hairdresser, she was a Jamaican woman named Auntie Cherry, and she spoke in tongues, and she always watched that, right? So then you sit in the seat, you have that little plastic bib on, and behind you, you hear the hairdresser mixing up your perm, right? She takes this ammonia smelling thing, pours it in a little plastic tub, stirs it till it sounds like mayonnaise. And it smells like rotten eggs. And then that goes on your head, right? Okay. And it goes on your roots and your strands, and you sit there and you have to wait for it to chemically straighten your hair. And you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And that cool cream starts feeling like tingling, and then itching, and then burning. And you're like, excuse me, I think I'm done now. I think it's time for you to wash it out. And all right, this is a check. No matter how long you've been waiting, when you say, I need you to take this out, what does she say? 5 more minutes. Exactly. And so you sit there and you're like, okay, 5 minutes, and you're counting the minutes like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Oh my God, I'm gonna die. It's like a little girl, all the Mississippis. But when she finally washes it out, you get under the thing, you feel that like cool water on your scalp. You have beautiful straight hair. You look like Diane Carroll on the cover of Jet magazine. You're so happy, right? But there were at least 2 rules after you get a perm. Wrap that shit up at night with Lester's pink oil. Do not get it wet for at least 5 days, or your hair will turn into a gremlin. Well, one time after getting a perm, I was like, Mom, I have swimming tomorrow, right? And my mom is Jamaican. And she was like, just don't swim. I was like, no, I have to swim or I'll get a bad grade. And she looked me dead in the eyes and she said, Bobby Jean, if you get into that water, watch me and you today. Which is a genuine threat from a Jamaican mother. But I was like, I don't know, dog. I think I'm gonna have to just like swim. And my mom, we just moved to the States, she was like, it's okay. I'm gonna do what I've seen all the American parents do. I'm gonna write a note. I'm gonna write a note to your PE teacher, who is this big white guy. I remember he had a lot of freckles. She's like, I'm just gonna write a note to him. So she sends me a note to school that says, Bobby Jean cannot go swimming today because she just got her hair done. And I was like, sure that it wasn't gonna go over. So like I said, I packed a little swimsuit in my bag because I was like, I don't know. But I showed up and I wasn't changed for swim class like the other students. And I should say I was the only black girl in my grade. So I didn't have anyone to like empathize with about this. I walk over to him, I hand him this note like sheepishly, and he like looks at me, reads the note, and in front of all my classmates tells me, it is ridiculous for me to want to get out of swimming because of my hair, and B, that I need swim class more than anybody else in this class, which I didn't realize was a microaggression at the time, but time heals, right? So I wish that I could say that this was, an isolated incident. I remember this incident to this day. When I think about it, I still feel mortified. And when I speak to other Black women around the country, we all have these traumatizing moments around our hair, this hair that we love, right? In Louisiana, where I live now, a young Black girl was sent home from school with braids because her school changed the grooming policy over the summer. And after Katrina, in a town near New Orleans, the sheriff said that he would instruct his deputies to stop people with, quote, locks and chiwi hairstyles. So this is happening, all over. And it's got real historical context in Louisiana. In the 1700s, there was a law called Tignon Law, which forced free women of color to cover their heads. What they didn't like bank on though was how amazing Black women are, right? They started covering their heads with these beautifully ornate scarves. When you think about like Marie Laveau, like the pictures you've seen of her, beautifully ornate scarves with clasps, and they just turned a negative to a positive. Like you couldn't stop their shine no matter what. They became more beautiful, right? Um, so fast forward to 2020, this is still a problem. You know, there was a survey that showed that Black women, 80% of Black women feel pressure to change their hair to fit in with societal norms. Black women are more likely to be shown a grooming policy than non-Black women in corporate settings. And there was a lawyer, her name is Nia Weeks. She's based in New Orleans. She's from New Orleans. And she has her own stories of trauma around her hair as a kid. And then when she got into the courtroom, other Black attorneys were telling her, don't wear your locks, don't wear your natural hair, because you're not going to get respect in the courtroom. And instead of conforming, she was like, I'm going to do something about this. So she pushed for a Crown Act to be passed in the state legislature. And Crown stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. It was started, I think New York City was the first municipality to pass it. And now there's lots of states in the country that have a similar law, right? And what it does is it protects against discrimination of people based on their hairstyles that are closely associated to race. So think like locks, braids, twists, things like that. So she pushes to have this law passed. It's the beginning of 2020, and then the pandemic happens, and it dies on the House floor. It doesn't go anywhere. But instead of getting completely discouraged, she regroups and she goes to New Orleans City Council with it. And after listening to lots of heartfelt testimony, New Orleans City Council passes a Crown Act, and it becomes the first municipality in the region to have a Crown Act. Although we are in Birmingham, which passed, it recognizes a National Crown Day, and they did that before New Orleans. So I want to recognize that. Don't come after me. So she did this, and then after that, I was just so moved by the testimony and everything. I went out to a bunch of salons in New Orleans to talk to women about what they thought about this law, and this is what some of them said.
I think it's sad that this legislation even has to exist. Black people should not always have to have something in legislation that protects us, or allows us to be ourselves.
It's not enough to say or to believe that equality or the lack of prejudice is present. It's better to have it in writing.
I think it's so imperative for us in the South to embrace this hair. Like it goes up and out. Like how amazing. Like it's literally touching the sky.
I love that last one. And, I was excited about this new law, but, I'm sure that Nia Weeks wanted it to be passed everywhere. So she's back at it. There is a Crown Act introduced on the House floor in Louisiana right now, but also the federal government might beat her to it. A Crown Act just passed the US House of Representatives. It's awaiting the Senate floor, and President Biden said he will sign it if it comes across his desk. Isn't that amazing? It just makes me really hopeful for other little Black kids, little Black girls. And it also makes me wish that there was a Crown Act when I was a little girl, standing at the edge of a pool, trying to decide what to do. And I wonder if we had a respectful and open world for natural hair, would I have even, cared about my hair? Maybe I would have just jumped in with my fro, swam with all the reckless abandon, jumped out, and shaked my head like I was that little girl on the beach, feeling the beads of cool water on my skin. Thank you so much.
Let's give her another round of applause. I think I did it okay announcing that she was a stand-up. It's okay, right? Like, very funny. Very good, very funny. And I just loved hearing all of those stories tonight. I've been working behind the scenes on a lot of things, but didn't actually hear the stories for the first time until yesterday. And I was just like a little proud of my little reporters. Very proud moment. Um, the folks that have been coaching them through this process, I want to just give another shout out to Local Lives. McCardle is here. He's the one who's been queuing everything upstairs, and also Tay Glass, who's hopefully watching online. And for the rest of the Gulf States Newsroom team, we also have Rasha McChesney, our newest hire. She's a senior content editor who's actually moving here from Alaska. So we're gonna get ready to show her around into all the great things about Birmingham too. She's from Texas, so it's not gonna be like, I know what you're thinking. It's okay. She's done the heat before. It's gonna be okay. And she was also a great help in coaching the reporters with their stories. Also want to give a shout out to Orlando Flores Jr. He's our digital editor. And something to know about all the work that we do as well is, you hear the stories on the radio, but the reporters are also writing articles and those versions of the stories that are up. And so he's responsible for that, and also the social media and getting our stories out in a lot of different ways. And we're also excited, we're just getting started. It's been basically a year that we've had this team. So we're gonna start doing a lot more things, hopefully more things like this, and a lot of other ways of sharing our stories. Also wanna give a shout out to Andrea Blackard Owens, our business manager, who was key in getting all of this together tonight. So let's give a round of applause to our team. And as promised, I'm so excited to bring Ashley M. Jones back up to the stage to give us another beautiful piece of work.
All right, that was awesome. I was just enjoying myself back there. Forgot I had to come back up here and read. I just have one more poem for you all tonight. This poem is actually from my newest book, which is called Reparations Now. And you can buy it if you would like to. No pressure, of course. This poem is about my dad, and it sort of tells a story like some of those that we heard. My dad was a fire chief in the city of Midfield and an assistant chief in the city of Birmingham. He passed away last year unexpectedly, which has still not really sunken in for me. In fact, I feel like I'm living in an alternate reality, truly. But this poem is about him, and I wrote it while he was still alive. It was actually commissioned by the Southern Foodways Alliance, and they had their winter symposium here in Birmingham a few years ago. The theme was food is work, and so I had to write about labor and some aspect of food making. My dad was, among many other things, a gardener, a really expert gardener. I know now that I've tried to do it in his absence. I cannot make anything work like he did. Um, but his love for gardening, of course, fed us literally, which was so crucial to us after he passed away. We were able to eat his last harvest over that summer. But it also taught me a lot growing up, that food could come out of the ground, for one. As a kid, that was so cool to see vegetables appearing and fruits appearing. But it also taught me a lot about liberation as well. As a descendant of enslaved people here in America, we have an interesting relationship to the land itself. Of course, we were stolen and trafficked and forced to work this land, not for our own benefit. So I think something that my dad taught me was looking at him as a Black man doing that labor, some of the same actions, turning over the soil, planting seeds, harvesting. He did all of those actions, but the result was for him. It wasn't for someone else. So I think we, as Black people especially, can reclaim some parts of ourselves by getting back into the land and understanding that even though we did not choose to be here, it is ours. So this is called photosynthesis. When I was young, my father taught us how dirt made way for food, how to turn over soil so it would hold a seed, an infant bud, how the dark could nurse it until it broke its green arms out to touch the sun. In every backyard we've ever had, he made a little garden plot with room for heirloom tomatoes, corn, carrots, peppers, jalapeno, bell and poblano, okra, eggplant, lemons, collards, broccoli, whole beans, watermelon, squash, trees filled with fruit and nuts, Brussels sprouts, herbs, basil, mint, parsley, rosemary, onions, sweet potatoes, cucumber, cantaloupe, cabbage, oranges, Swiss chard, and peaches, sunflowers tall and straight-backed as soldiers, lantana, amaryllis, echinacea, pansies and roses, and bushes bubbling with hydrangeas. Every plant with its purpose, flowers to bring worms and wasps, how their work matters here. This is the work we have always known, pulling food and flowers from a pile of earth. The difference now, my father is not a slave, not a sharecropper. This land is his, and so is this garden, so is this work. The difference is that he owns this labor, the work of his own hands for his own belly, for his own children's bellies. We eat because he works. This is the legacy of his grandmother, my great granny, Ollie Mae Harris, and her untouchable flower garden. Just like her hats, her flower beds sprouted something special, plants and colors the neighbors could only dream of. He was young when he learned that this beauty is built on work. The cows and the factories in their stomachs, the fertilizer they spewed out, the stink that brought such fragrance. What you call waste, I call power. What you call work, I make beautiful again. In his garden, even problems become energy, beauty. My father has ended many work days in the backyard, worries of the firehouse dropping like grain. My father wrist deep in soil. I am convinced the earth speaks back to him as he feeds it. It is a conversational labor, gardening. The seeds tell him what they will be. The soil tells seeds how to grow. My father speaks sun and water into the earth. We hear him each harvest, his heartbeat sweet like fruit. Thank you.